What's going on, Dolphins? It is your boy Dillon, and in light of everything that we've been talking about and things that have happened, and with the draft coming up very soon, I wanted to do a short-ish video. I'll try and keep it as short as possible on how I would build a team if I was, an owner or GM or what have you. So I'm going to play GM Dillon today, and I'm going to tell you guys what my philosophy would be for building a team in the National Football League. First and foremost, the basic philosophy would be build through the draft and supplement through free agency. So let's start with the draft. So first and foremost, when it comes to the draft, I strongly believe that it is not where you draft, but how you draft. Okay, so, but I'll get into that in a minute. Obviously, the first thing that you have to do when going into the draft is build your board. Now, what I would do is, for me, right, coaches and front office personnel, they always say, things like best player available and need and blah, blah, blah. Look, man, honestly, I'm pretty sure, obviously I don't know this for a fact, but I'm pretty sure every organization does a cross between the two, right? Like a hybrid. So in other words, when they're deciding, where these players fall on their board, they're going to, part of their evaluation is going to be, what positions do we need, the most, and, then that plays into, who they view as the best player available at the time when they're picking, right? So, that's why I said for me, if I was listing, if I was making my draft board, I would say that offensive line is the number one position, and the whole offensive line, except for left tackle at this point. We need a left guard, we need a center, we need a right guard, we need a right tackle, right? So, but offensive line as a whole is the number one, but since we have such a big need at that, in that area, I would draft two guys, right? Then defensive line, and then I would say quarterback is then third on the list. The reason why it's third on the list is because I think that we should take one in the middle rounds, but also we do need to bring in some veteran help. And as I've outlined, I think that should be Colin Kaepernick, but that was for my previous video. So anyway, we do need to bring in some veteran help there. Obviously, we don't need 6 quarterbacks. We have Jake Ruddock and Luke Falk as well right now. So if we draft one and bring in, a veteran free agent, then that gives us 4. So we're good. So it's third on the list. It's not first like a lot of people think. Also, that's one of the things about my philosophy that I wouldn't have, is I wouldn't have that quarterback is always and forever, no matter what, the most important position, no matter, despite any other factors. That's not me. You guys know I'm a full context guy, and it's a case-by-case basis. So first would be O-line, then D-line, then quarterback, and then cornerback. And then everything else, falls in after that, which would be, at best a 6th or 7th round pick, but most likely then, undrafted free agents is where you would pick up from there. And then, but to rank it, it would then go linebacker, and then, wide receiver and running back, right? Tight ends, we don't fucking need tight ends for shit right now. But I mean, you could always bring one in, of course. I would not say, don't exclude any position groups either. That's not me. Anyway, so you identify what your most pressing needs are, right? And then you start identifying your board based off of that, right? Because you're and then obviously the players, right? So then you do all your player evaluations. So what I would do is I would start off with two boards, right? I would have, basically it would be my list of position groups by need, right? And a list of priorities, which ones are higher, and then I would just do a big board, an overall big board of just all the players, right, coming into the draft, right? So like, how a lot of when they do analysis, when the media does their analysis and they make their big boards, right? It's just the best player, period, right? So you make that board, and then what you do is you take that board and then you adjust it based off of your priorities list and what position groups are the most important, right? So you might have like a running back as the 5th best player in the draft overall, but he's gonna fall down your board because you don't need a running back that bad, right? Stuff like that. Anyway, so then once you've gotten your board made up, then you need to think about some other things like more specific philosophies. Like I've already stated one about the quarterback. I'm not gonna, because I don't like chasing guys, because there have been plenty of examples of guys being drafted super high and then not panning out. Frankly, even though I would disagree with this in a lot of ways, you could use Tannehill as an example, at least with the Dolphins organization at this point, because he didn't win us any championships. That is a fact. And although it's not all on him, so let's make that clear. Let's be clear. And I'm not going to rehash all the reasons why Tannehill is actually a really good quarterback. See my other videos for that. But he was a high draft pick, and he, at the end of the day, when the story's written, despite the fact that he has numerous Dolphins franchise records and he actually was a wonderful quarterback for us on and off the field, all that stuff, his tenure didn't work out here, unfortunately, as far as if you're just looking at it from the perspective of winning championships. Okay, but then you have other people like Tim Tebow, who was, just a complete bust all around, right? And then, of course, like, not even just quarterbacks, but other players taken high. We know that Deion Jordan, we moved up to get him number 3, and he was a complete bust for us. He had a little bit of time there in Seattle, but I don't think he's on a team right now, right? So I'm not a fan of just chasing guys around and just giving away draft capital. Okay, so my philosophy would be this. So wherever you pick on the board, in this particular case, since we are at 13, I'll use that as the example. So when the 13th pick comes around, you have your board now, you have it set based off of your priorities, like how you've ranked each individual player based off of their skill set, how you think they're going to translate to the NFL, your interviews with them, all that accumulated information, right? Real quick, just a side note, that's actually a really good thing to use as an example for full context, right? So when it comes to Tannehill or Gase or just anything else, people, all these motherfuckers that are just like straight up hating, they don't use full context. They cherry pick, right? And it obviously doesn't work when you decide to ignore facts and stuff like that. And so, but the example is the scouting department. So you think that when these organizations are making their decisions on players and how they're gonna fall on their boards, you think that the only information they take is what the scouting department says and like what their measurables are and stuff like that? No, they take their combine results, their pro day results, all the information that their scouting departments have on them, all of their college careers, right? The things they did over that, injury history. They talk to them and do interviews so they can find out what kind of person they are, right? That's called full context. Getting all the information and then making a decision based off of all the information, not just pieces of it. Anyway, so then you take your board, right? And at number 13, you pick the best player available out of the most needed position at that time. So whatever round you're in, because obviously if you're in round 5, you've knocked some things off your list, and so your priorities list changes as you go through, right? So at number 13, I would take the absolute best offensive lineman in the draft, unless there is a caveat to that, and that is that if, let's say, we get to 13 and within the first 12 picks, the 3 offensive linemen go, and all 3 of those offensive linemen are worth taking in the first round. Now obviously then that adds another layer to this whole decision-making process but that goes into the evaluation of the players, right? So they're given first round grades, second round grades. So if you have 4 linemen that have first round grades that you would be willing to take at 13, then you take that 4th lineman. But if you only had 3 linemen, offensive linemen, that had first round grades, and all those guys go, then even though offensive line is your most pressing need, if the only offensive lineman you would be willing to take in the first round are gone, then it's okay. It's acceptable to deviate a little bit and, let's say, maybe take a defensive lineman, your second most important position of need, in the first round, if there's a defensive lineman you really love with a first round grade that fits all the stuff you need. Also though, it's perfectly acceptable to move back, and that takes me into the next part of my overall philosophy. So the first thing I would do is take the best player available at the highest position of need in any given round when it's our pick, wherever it is that we pick, right? So, but if we're not happy with that, if there is nobody that we're willing to take in the first round out of the top positions that we need, then I am not really an advocate for chasing guys. I don't like moving up very much. When it comes to making those moves, I would be very conservative, and I wouldn't do it very often. I would do it on occasion, but the other part of my philosophy would enable me to do that. So what I mean is that if I'm not happy at 13, I move back and I stockpile picks. I stockpile picks for the future and for the current draft, so I give myself more chances, and then also I mitigate some of the risk by just reaching for a guy in the first round at the pick we have, and he might not really have that grade or that skill set or the worth for taking in that first round, right? Or at the position you did. Maybe, he'd be worth a few picks lower or whatever, and that would be okay. So then you stockpile picks, you trade back and you stockpile picks. And that is your overall basic philosophy. Pick at the number you have unless you're not happy. If you're not happy, then you move back and you accumulate more draft capital instead of being super aggressive, like a lot. Again, I would do it occasionally, but what would happen is if 75%, or it would probably be more than that, if like 85-90% of the time that's what you do, either pick at your number or move back, then, well, let's do it a little bit more reasonably. Let's say 60% of the time you pick at your number, at the number that you have. Let's say 30% of the time you move back, right, and accumulate more draft capital, and then 10% of the time you move up. What you'll see will happen is that either obviously it'll be just like a neutral in the perspective of draft capital if you just pick at the number you have, right? But then with that 30% of moving back, you're gonna just stack, and we saw this with like the Browns, the Jaguars did it for a minute, the Bills did it there for a minute as well, right? And you stockpile all these picks, and then when you do have that, you know, occasion in which you have this overwhelming, like, you know, need to pick a certain player, right? Like whenever you in that 10% of the time where you get this like overwhelming desire and you fall in love with a certain player, then you move up, but you'll have the draft capital to do it without sweating it, right? Like right now, if we were to, as it stands today, we have 7 picks, 2 of which are in the 7th, and we don't have a 6th. If we were to move up, as it stands right now, if the draft was today, and we moved up to the number 1 pick to get Kyler Murray, we would have to give away probably 1 or 2 picks. We would have to give away our first round pick, so number 13. We would have to trade that. Then we'd have to give away an additional 1 or 2 picks in this draft, and then an additional 1 or 2 picks in like the 2020 draft, right? So you're just, and it depends. So it could be like 1 and 1, or maybe like 2 this draft and nothing in the future, or 2 next, whatever. The point is though, is you're giving away a ton of stuff, right? But you don't really have a lot to begin with. So, you know, why would you, like, anyway, I'm not going to do some crazy analogy, but like it doesn't make sense to do that. Anyway, so hopefully and then before I wrap up, the final thing then is, you know, once you've done that, so like let's say in this first phase of free agency, I honestly wouldn't be active like hardly at all, right? And I know that's when all the best free agents are there, and obviously teams scoop them up fast, but also that's when people are the most expensive and superfluously, right? Like it's over the top, right? And it makes sense because of how free agency works, although that is part of what's caused, you know, disloyalty and you know, that's fed into the greed of the system and everything. But anyway, I would stay basically quiet. You know, I wouldn't stay totally quiet. Like if you could, like the Eric Rowe signing, I thought that was a good signing, right? If you can get a you know, a quality player for a reasonable price, do it, right? And I thought that was a good signing. You know, so but be very conservative. You know, don't go with those big splash plays. Don't go with the big name free agents just because they're big name free agents, right? And then that way you don't super stress your cap space either, right? Because draftees, they're all super cheap, right? Until then, the next contracts. But then if you do it this way, you'll also see that, and then you supplement, you know, the remaining holes on your team in the second part of free agency, a little bit in the first part, and then mostly in the second part of free agency, just to round out the roster. But then of course you also get undrafted free agents, so you can bring in whatever of those you need, right? So free agency should overall be a very small portion of where your money goes, your cap space goes. So what you will see is that with this philosophy, you will constantly be bringing in young, new talent, and you will also be, but then you will also have enough, right, through your supplemental free agency, right, essentially, right, supplementing through free agency. You will then bring in your veteran leadership, you know, and guys that you need to help establish your culture, set a tone, and help teach the younger guys. And then the guys that you draft, you know, they grow and learn and develop in your system. You know, their house, what's the term? Their, oh goodness. Like bred here, but that's not it. The homegrown, there we go. Homegrown, they be homegrown, right? You draft them, and then that way too, since you're not spending all kinds of money in free agency, when contracts do end, right? For those guys like Xavier Howard on the team, you can pay him because you'll have the cap space. You won't be just throwing all kinds of money around, right? And so I think that overall, that should be how this Dolphins franchise goes forward right now and in the future, right? So I made the video for you guys yesterday about how the Dolphins can fix this. And if they adopted that kind of philosophy, and if that's how they go about things, then they shouldn't ever really have a problem, right? But they do need to implement a bit of, you know, loyalty. They need to be like, okay, look, you know, because one of our biggest problems is not just necessarily that we've drafted bad, but then we don't retain those guys. We just let them walk, you know, like Lamar Miller and Olivier Vernon and a bunch of other guys, blah, 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 blah. There's lots of them. And, you know, you could argue their success after the fact, after they left here, but that's not really the point. My point is that when you have guys that you draft, you work them up through your system, through your culture, under your coaches, you know, with the teammates that they've had, you know, allow that continuity to be there, allow that chemistry to remain there and keep those guys, especially when they're high performers, they're in their primes of their career, you know, and they've performed for you, so reward them, right? And then also, you'll see that players want to come to Miami because they see that kind of culture. They know that the coaching staff and the organization has their back. Also, you'll start to see things like Cameron Wake. Why do you think Cameron Wake restructured and extended his contract so much? Because he wanted to be in Miami, right? And players would be willing to do that. They might be willing. Kenny Stills did it, right? He decided to stay in Miami to play with Gase, and decided to take less money than he could have gotten elsewhere because of that. So that is, and then of course that plays into culture and everything, which I believe is super important. But that's all part of it, right? So anyway, short-ish. Obviously that turned into a whole montage as usual. But anyway, I hope though that you guys like, you know, my videos and what I had to say. I hope you guys, you know, can see how, you know, it's a really logical approach. It's overall conservative and safe, but allows you to take calculated risks, you know, when you're really feeling it, when it's necessary, and it allows you to build a solid, structural foundation that's going to you know, be able to provide you with, you know, long-term sustained success. But anyway, of course, you know, let me know what you guys think, you know, leave your comments, tell me how, you know, you guys might tweak it, so on and so forth. I know there's going to be a lot of, you know, just shit talking, hate comments from, you know, ridiculous people that don't like to, you know, be logical or whatever, or they're just gonna talk shit just because, and that's fine too, whatever. I can ignore you if I need to, or I can engage in debate if you're willing to have, you know, an open-minded conversation about things. Because again, look, man, there are certain fundamental basic facts that are undisputable, but if we're talking and having conversations about the most efficient ways to solve our problems, then I'm happy to do it, instead of arguing over that the problem, you know, what the problems are, right? Anyway, so with that though, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and get up out of here. I hope you guys enjoy my videos. If you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button, make sure you hit the like button, make sure you hit the bell if you want to get the alerts. Leave your questions, comments, and concerns down in the comment section, and as always, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Dillon Tartaro. And with that, I am out. I'll see y'all soon. Fins up.